Commander Zexathera straightened in his chair as much as his chains would allow, his four eyes focusing on Admiral Morrison with an intensity that made the entire courtroom fall silent. The alien's voice carried a weight of finality, the tone of someone describing the end of everything he had ever known or believed in. The final phase of the war began when your species stopped defending and started hunting us, he said quietly. Admiral Tony Walsh commanded the human counterattack, and he taught the galaxy that there was something far worse than fighting humans on their home ground, that something was fighting humans who had decided to take the war to their enemies. Dr. Ward felt a chill as she prepared to record the alien's account of humanity's final offensive. She had been on Earth during those months when human fleets had swept through Kalani space like an unstoppable force of nature, using captured alien technology combined with human tactical doctrine to devastating effect. Admiral Walsh had studied every battle we had fought against your species, Zexathera continued. He understood that conventional space warfare favored the side with superior technology, so he developed strategies that turned our technological advantages into weaknesses. Every human ship in his fleet was equipped with captured Kalani weapons and shields, but they were controlled by human crews who fought like no enemy we had ever encountered. The alien paused, his breathing becoming labored as he remembered those final terrible months of the war. Admiral Walsh's fleet moved through our outer colonies like a plague of destruction, not conquering worlds in the traditional sense, but demonstrating to every Kalani citizen that their empire could no longer protect them from human vengeance. Morrison remembered the classified briefings about Walsh's campaign strategy. The Admiral had combined human determination with Kalani technology to create a war machine that could strike anywhere in the galaxy and disappear before enemy reinforcements could respond. It had been a masterpiece of strategic thinking and tactical execution. The Battle of Kalani Prime was supposed to be our final stand, Zexathera said, his voice growing flat and emotionless.
300 of our finest ships defending the homeworld against 60 human vessels. Our battle computers calculated that we held overwhelming advantages in every category that mattered in space warfare. The alien's hands clenched into fists.
Despite his restraints, Admiral Walsh could have negotiated a conditional surrender at that point. Our Emperor was prepared to discuss terms, to find some way to end the war that would allow both species to survive. Instead, your Admiral sent us a message that contained only 13 words. Surrender now, or we glass your homeworld like you tried to glass Earth. Dr. Ward made notes about that final ultimatum, remembering how it had been broadcast throughout human space as proof that their species had finally achieved the strength to dictate terms to their enemies. After 3 years of desperate defense, humanity had become the aggressor. We knew Admiral Walsh meant every word of his threat, Zexathera continued. We had learned during 3 years of war that humans never bluffed about matters of life and death. If we refused his demand for unconditional surrender, he would carry out his promise to destroy our homeworld and everyone on it. The alien's voice grew quieter as he described the final battle of the war. The Battle of Kalani Prime lasted exactly 6 hours and 17 minutes. Admiral Walsh used 40 of his ships as guided missiles, their human crews piloting them directly into our defensive formations to create gaps for his remaining vessels to exploit. Morrison felt a complex mix of pride and horror as he listened to the alien's description of Walsh's final strategy. The Admiral had asked for volunteers to crew those suicide ships, and more humans had volunteered than there were positions available. They had seen it not as a death sentence, but as an honor, to strike the final blow against humanity's enemies. Your Admiral used human determination as his primary weapon, Zexathera explained. Every ship in his fleet was crewed by people who had lost families, friends, or homeworlds to our forces. They fought not just to win the battle, but to ensure that no human would ever again have to fear Kalani ships in their sky. The alien paused, and his 4 eyes focused on Admiral Morrison with something that might have been understanding. When Admiral Walsh's remaining ships broke through our orbital defenses, he opened communication channels with every military installation in the Kalani Empire. Not just our homeworld, but every base, every ship, every outpost throughout our territory. Dr. Ward looked up from her notes, knowing that she was about to hear about the moment when humanity had achieved total victory over an enemy that had once seemed invincible. The final demonstration of what humans could accomplish when they refused to accept defeat. Admiral Walsh appeared on our screens wearing a simple military uniform, standing on the bridge of his flagship as it orbited our homeworld. Zexithara said. Behind him we could see the wreckage of our once mighty defense fleet floating in space like broken toys. He spoke in perfect Kalani, using words that every warrior in our empire would understand. The alien's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. Your admiral said, "The Kalani Empire has fallen. Your fleets are destroyed, your colonies are defenseless, and your homeworld lies under human guns. You have one choice remaining. Surrender now and face trial for your war crimes, or watch your species join the 17 others you destroyed during your centuries of conquest." Morrison remembered reading the transcript of that broadcast. Walsh had been calm and professional, showing no anger or hatred toward the enemy he had just defeated. He had spoken like someone delivering a business report rather than the final ultimatum of a species war. I was the one who accepted surrender on behalf of the Kalani Empire, Zexithara admitted. I looked at Admiral Walsh's face on the communication screen and understood that humanity had become something the galaxy had never seen before. You were no longer the primitive species we had tried to conquer 3 years earlier. The alien straightened as much as his chains would allow, meeting Admiral Morrison's gaze directly. Your people had learned to wage total war more effectively than any species in galactic history. You had turned desperation into determination, weakness into strength, and the fear of death into a weapon that could destroy entire civilizations. Dr. Ward made her final notes as Zexithara concluded his testimony. The alien's words would be studied by military historians and strategists for generations, a first-hand account of how humanity had evolved from victims to victors in the span of 3 terrible years. The War Crimes Tribunal wants to know why the Kalani Empire lost a war against a technologically inferior enemy, Zexithara said, his voice carrying a tone of finality. The answer is simple. We taught humans how to fight a war of extinction, and they learned that lesson better than we ever could. The alien looked around the courtroom one final time, his 4 eyes taking in the faces of the judges who would decide his fate. We had conquered 17 species using superior technology and overwhelming force, but humanity conquered us using something far more powerful. The absolute refusal to accept defeat, even when defeat was the only logical outcome. Zexithara's chains clinked softly as he leaned back in his chair, exhausted by the weight of his testimony. You want to know what humans are? You are the species that turned survival into an art form and war into a science. You are the species that scared the galaxy into peace. The courtroom fell silent as the alien concluded his final words. God help any species that threatens Earth in the future, because humanity has learned lessons from this war that will make them the most dangerous enemy the galaxy has ever known. Admiral Morrison and Dr. Ward exchanged glances as Commander Zexithara was led away to await the tribunal's verdict. They had heard the enemy's account of humanity's transformation from peaceful explorers into the galaxy's most effective warriors. The story was both inspiring and terrifying, a reminder of what humans could become when their survival was threatened. As they walked through the corridors of the space station where the tribunal was being held, Morrison and Ward passed viewports, showing human warships patrolling the galaxy. No longer defenders of Earth, but guardians of a peace enforced by the species that had learned to turn war itself into their greatest weapon. Commander Zexithara's breathing had become labored as he continued his testimony. The weight of memory seemed to press down on him like a physical force, making his 4 eyes dart around the courtroom as if searching for escape from the horrors he was describing. Admiral Morrison and Dr. Ward watched silently, knowing they were hearing about humanity's transformation from desperate defenders into something far more dangerous. By the 2nd year of the war, we had learned to fear what we called the human infection. The alien began, his voice barely above a whisper. It was not a disease in any biological sense, but something far worse. It was humanity's ability to turn any conflict into a grinding nightmare that consumed everything we threw at it and demanded more. Dr. Ward looked up from her notes, remembering, the reports that had come from the outer colonies during that dark period of the war. Human forces had adapted to fighting without supply lines, without reinforcements, without any hope of victory through conventional means. They had learned to survive and fight in conditions that should have been impossible for any living being. Major Rick Turner pioneered what your military called deep space guerrilla warfare, Zexathara continued. His unit operated in the void, between star systems, striking at our supply convoys and communication relays before disappearing into asteroid fields and nebulae, where our sensors could not track them. The alien paused, his hands trembling despite the restraints. Turner's ghosts, as they came to be known, survived for 8 months without any contact with human command. 8 months in the cold vacuum of space, eating emergency rations and recycled algae, breathing air that was more carbon dioxide than oxygen, and somehow remaining combat effective throughout their entire deployment. Morrison had read the classified reports about Turner's unit and others like it. Human forces had learned to operate in environments that killed most species within days, using their biological stubbornness and refusal to die as strategic advantages that no enemy could counter. With superior technology, we could not understand how your species could function under those conditions, Zexathara admitted. Our warriors required regular rotation, medical support, and psychological counseling after even short deployments against human forces. Your people seemed to thrive on hardship and impossible odds. The alien's voice grew more troubled as he continued. Major Turner's tactics violated every principle of civilized warfare that we understood. His forces would disable our ships without destroying them, then broadcast personal messages to the crews trapped inside. Not threats or demands for surrender, but conversations about their families and homeworlds while they slowly died from life support failures. Dr. Ward felt a chill as she recorded those words. She had seen the psychological evaluation reports from Kalani prisoners who had survived encounters with Turner's unit. Many of them had required extended mental health treatment and refused to return to combat duties. The psychological impact of these tactics spread throughout our entire military structure, Zexathara explained. Warriors who had served proudly for decades began requesting transfers away from human sectors. Our traditional rotation schedules collapsed as soldiers refused deployment orders rather than face Turner's ghosts in the darkness between the stars. The alien shifted in his chair, the chains around his wrists clicking softly. But Major Turner was not the worst of your commanders during that period. Commander Helen Brooks defended the mining world Kepler 442b using tactics that still give me nightmares 3 years after the war ended. Morrison remembered Helen Brooks from intelligence briefings. She had been known for her ability to turn environmental hazards into strategic advantages, using natural phenomena as weapons against enemy forces in ways that military theorists had never imagined possible. Kepler 442b was a dead world with severe radiation storms and atmospheric conditions that made surface operations extremely dangerous, Zexathara continued. Our battle computers calculated that the planet could be taken with minimal losses using standard orbital bombardment, followed by ground assault during calm weather periods. The alien's voice grew flat and emotionless as he described what had actually happened. Commander Brooks had different plans for us. She moved her entire defense force underground, using the planet's mining tunnels as a fortress system that extended for hundreds of kilometers beneath the surface. Then she began timing her attacks to coincide with the radiation storms that would kill any unprotected troops on the surface. Dr. Ward made notes about the innovative defensive strategies that had emerged during the middle years of the war. Human commanders had learned to use their home ground advantages in ways that turned every natural hazard into a weapon against invading forces. For 8 months, Commander Brooks and her people lived like animals in those underground tunnels, Zexathara said. They ate processed algae and recycled water, breathed filtered air, and somehow maintained the will to fight while our forces controlled the surface and orbital space around their planet. The alien paused, and something that might have been respect crossed his features. Every time we thought we had eliminated organized resistance, Commander Brooks would emerge from those tunnels during a radiation storm and strike at our supply depots and command posts. Our soldiers would find themselves fighting enemies who appeared out of nowhere, attacked with desperate fury, and then vanished back underground before our reinforcements could respond. Morrison had studied the tactical reports from Kepler 442b. Brooks had essentially created a new form of warfare that combined underground resistance with environmental warfare, turning a hostile planet into an ally against the occupying forces. The worst part was not the attacks themselves, but what Commander Brooks did to mark her victories. Zexathera continued, his voice dropping to a whisper. Every time her forces successfully struck at our positions, she would leave messages, carved into the bedrock using mining equipment. The same words every time. Humans were here. Humans will return. The aliens' four eyes focused on something beyond the courtroom walls, lost in the memory of those terrible months on Kepler 442b. Our troops began to believe those messages. They started to fear that humans could appear anywhere, strike without warning, and disappear back into the ground like demons from some ancient mythology. Dr. Ward looked up from her notes, understanding now how humanity's reputation had spread throughout the Kalani Empire during the war's middle years. Human forces had become something more than enemies. They had become legends that haunted the dreams of alien warriors. When we finally abandoned Kepler 442b, we left behind 12,000 dead soldiers and a planet that our empire would never try to occupy again, Zexathera admitted. Commander Brooks had turned a worthless mining world into a symbol of human resistance that terrified our forces more than any conventional military defeat. The alien's voice grew stronger as he approached the end of his testimony about the Middle War years. By that time, we had begun to understand that we were not fighting a war in any sense we could comprehend. We were fighting against a species that had learned to turn suffering itself into a weapon, and we had no defense against an enemy that treated death as just another tactical option. Morrison felt a complex mix of pride and sadness as he listened to the alien's words. Humanity had won the war, but the cost had been enormous. They had become something that scared the galaxy, and there was no going back to the innocent species they had been before the first Kalani ship appeared in Earth's sky. The human infection had spread throughout our empire, Zexathera concluded, and we knew that unless we could find a way to end the war quickly, it would consume us completely. The silence in the courtroom stretched for long moments before Commander Zexathera spoke again. His four eyes focused on Admiral Morrison with an intensity that made the human officer uncomfortable. The alien's voice carried a weight of respect, mixed with something that might have been fear. After New Denver, we knew we faced an enemy unlike any we had conquered before, Zexathera began. But we still believed that superior technology and overwhelming force would eventually break human resistance. We were wrong again. The siege of Titan Base taught us that humans could turn even the act of dying into a weapon that would haunt us for years to come. Dr. Ward shifted in her chair, remembering the broadcasts that had come from Titan Base during those terrible months. The research station orbiting Saturn had become humanity's symbol of defiance, a place where 800 people had held off an entire Kalani siege fleet through methods that defied every rule of civilized warfare. Colonel Amy Price commanded Titan Base when our second attack fleet arrived in the Saturn system, the alien continued. Our intelligence reports said the station was primarily a research facility with minimal defenses. 800 personnel, mostly scientists and technicians, a few security guards and some automated defense systems. It should have fallen within hours of our arrival. Zexathera paused, his hands clenched into fists, despite the chains around his wrists. Colonel Price sent us surrender demands, not a request to surrender, but demands that we withdraw from the Saturn system immediately or face the consequences of attacking a human military installation. Our fleet commander laughed when he heard her message. Admiral Morrison remembered Amy Price from his academy days. She had been known for her brilliant tactical mind and her ability to find solutions to problems that seemed impossible. More importantly, she had possessed an almost supernatural ability to inspire absolute loyalty in the people under her command. We began the siege using standard procedures, the alien explained. Cut off the station's supply lines, jam their communications, and wait for their supplies to run out. Most species surrender when they realize they cannot receive food or medical supplies. We expected the humans to request negotiations within a few weeks. The alien's voice grew troubled, as he continued the story. Instead, Colonel Price began broadcasting on every frequency our ships could receive. Not military communications or calls for help, but personal messages from every human on the station. Stories about their families back on Earth, their hopes and dreams, their memories of home. Dr. Ward looked up from her notes, remembering how those broadcasts had affected people throughout human space. The defenders of Titan Base had become real individuals to millions of humans who listened to their daily messages, their jokes and fears, and small moments of humanity in the middle of a desperate siege. At first, we ignored the broadcasts, Zexthera admitted. Personal communications between enemies meant nothing to us. But Colonel Price was doing something we had never encountered before. She was studying us while she spoke to us. She learned our language, our customs, our military protocols. Most disturbing of all, she learned the names of our warriors. The alien's voice dropped to nearly a whisper as he described what came next. When our forces began their assault on the station's outer defenses, Colonel Price started broadcasting the names and service records of every Kalani warrior who died in the fighting. Not just names, but personal details about their families, their achievements, their hopes for the future. Morrison felt a chill as he remembered reading the transcripts of those broadcasts. Amy Price had somehow gathered detailed intelligence on individual Kalani soldiers and used that knowledge to turn their deaths into personal tragedies that affected the morale of the entire siege fleet. She would perform funeral rites for our dead using our own religious ceremonies, Zexthera continued, his four eyes wide with remembered disbelief. Your Colonel Price would speak the names of fallen Kalani warriors with perfect pronunciation, honoring their service and mourning their loss in ways that our own commanders often forgot to do. It was the most disturbing psychological warfare we had ever encountered. The alien shifted uncomfortably in his chains before continuing. But Colonel Price was not content to simply demoralize our forces. She began using Titan Base's research facilities to continuously modify her defensive strategies. Every time our ships adapted to her tactics, she would create new weapons and attack methods using whatever resources she had available. Dr. Ward remembered the reports of ingenuity that had come from Titan Base during the siege. Price and her team had turned research equipment into weapons, maintenance drones into guided missiles, and scientific instruments into targeting systems, for attacks that struck Kalani ships in ways their designers had never anticipated. The station's manufacturing facilities became weapon factories, Zexthera explained. Your people built new types of missiles using parts from laboratory equipment. They turned cargo shuttles into suicide attack craft piloted by volunteers, who recorded personal messages for their families before launching their final missions. The alien paused, and his voice carried a note of something approaching awe. What made Titan Base truly terrifying was not the weapons or the tactics. It was the fact that Colonel Price maintained perfect morale among her defenders for 4 months, while they knew with absolute certainty that they were going to die. Morrison had studied the psychological profiles of the Titan Base defenders. Every single person on that station had understood that rescue was impossible, and that their mission was simply to inflict maximum damage on the Kalani siege fleet before their inevitable death. Yet their communications had remained upbeat and determined throughout the entire siege. Colonel Price held daily briefings that were broadcast to our ships as well as her own people, Zexthera continued. She would discuss the tactical situation, acknowledge losses among her defenders, and then explain exactly how those sacrifices were contributing to humanity's overall war effort. She made every death meaningful. The alien's voice grew harsh with memory. Our siege lasted 4 months because we could not break the will of 800 humans who refused to surrender even when their situation became completely hopeless. Every time we destroyed one of their defensive positions, they would rebuild it using different materials and tactics. Every time we cut off one of their supply routes, they would find ways to create what they needed from base resources. Dr. Ward made notes about the innovative tactics that had emerged from Titan Base, methods that had been studied and adapted by human forces throughout the war. Price had essentially created a new form of warfare that combined industrial capacity with absolute determination to resist. The final assault on Titan Base required 43 of our best ships, Zexthera stated. We lost all but 17 of those vessels to weapons that Colonel Price had built from research equipment and spare parts. When we finally breached the station's hull, we found that she had prepared one last surprise for us. The alien paused, and his hands trembled as he remembered that final moment. Colonel Price had connected the station's main computer to every communication array in the human system. When our troops entered the command center, they found her standing at the main console, speaking into a microphone connected to transmitters throughout human space. Morrison knew what was coming next. Amy Price's final broadcast had become legendary among human military forces, a 3-hour transmission that had changed the course of the entire war. Your Colonel Price spent 18 hours reading the names of every human who had died in the war up to that point, Zexathara said quietly. Over 3 million names, with personal details about each person's life and family. She spoke continuously, until her life support finally failed, making every human death in the war into a personal tragedy that your entire species could mourn together. The alien looked directly at Admiral Morrison with something that might have been respect. When Titan Base finally fell, we had achieved our objective, but we no longer had an army capable of continuing the war. The siege had broken the spirit of our forces more completely than any military defeat ever could. We had learned to fear the sound of human voices in the darkness of space. The chains around Commander Zexthara's wrists made a soft clicking sound as he shifted in his chair. The alien's 4 eyes moved slowly across the room, taking in the faces of the judges who would decide his fate. His blue-gray skin looked pale under the bright lights of the war tribunal chamber. 3 years had passed since the war ended, but the alien commander still carried the weight of defeat in his hunched shoulders. Admiral Jake Morrison sat at the human delegation table, his uniform crisp and clean. Next to him, Dr. Lisa Ward adjusted her glasses and prepared to take notes. Both humans had lived through the war, but they wanted to hear the enemy's side of the story. The galaxy needed to understand what had happened during those terrible years when 2 species tried to destroy each other. The head judge, a tall being from the neutral Kordak system, spoke in a calm voice. Commander Zexathara, you stand accused of war crimes against the human species. You have agreed to testify about the events that led to the destruction of the Kalani Empire. Please tell us how this war began. Zexathara's laugh was bitter and harsh. It echoed off the metal walls of the chamber like broken glass. You want to know how it began? It began with our arrogance. We thought your species was nothing more than clever animals playing with metal toys in space. Admiral Morrison leaned forward slightly. He had commanded ships during the war, had seen friends die in the cold vacuum of space. But he needed to hear this story, needed to understand how his people had become something that scared the entire galaxy. The alien continued, his voice growing stronger as he remembered those early days. The Kalani Empire had conquered 17 star systems before we found your little blue world. 17 different species had either surrendered the moment our ships appeared in their skies, or they had fought us using tactics we understood and defeated easily. Every war followed the same pattern. We would arrive with superior weapons and technology. The enemy would meet us in space battles or defend their planets with energy shields and plasma cannons. We would win because our ships were faster, our weapons stronger, our tactics proven over centuries of conquest. Dr. Ward made notes on her tablet, recording every word. The human delegation had spent months preparing for this testimony. They knew that Zexathara's words would be studied by military academies and historians for generations to come. When our scouts first observed Earth, we saw exactly what we expected to see, Zexathara said, his 4 eyes focusing on something far beyond the courtroom walls. A young species that had barely learned to leave its home planet. Your ships were slow metal containers that burned chemical fuel to push themselves through space. Your weapons were primitive projectile launchers that fired small pieces of metal. You had no energy shields, no faster-than-light communication networks, no understanding of quantum warfare principles. The alien's voice carried a tone of regret that surprised everyone in the room. Our military analysts spent 3 days studying your defenses. 3 days. They concluded that the entire human species could be conquered in less than 1 solar rotation. The plan was simple and efficient. We would destroy your space stations and orbital platforms, then demand surrender from your planetary governments. If you refused, we would demonstrate our power by destroying one of your cities. Every other species had surrendered at that point. Admiral Morrison remembered those early days when humanity first detected the Kalani fleet at the edge of the solar system. Earth's governments had panicked. The human military knew they were outgunned and outmatched in every category that mattered in space warfare. But they had not known what their enemy thought of them, had not realized that the Kalani saw them as barely worth the effort of conquest. We assigned our third attack fleet to your system, Zexathera continued. Not our best ships or most experienced commanders, you understand. The third fleet was used for routine conquests, for breaking the resistance of worlds that could not possibly threaten the Empire. I commanded those ships because the victory was supposed to be so certain that it would serve as a training exercise for younger officers. The alien's hands trembled slightly as he spoke. The weight of memory seemed to press down on him like a physical force. We entered your solar system broadcasting standard surrender demands in every language our computers could translate. We expected your leaders to contact us within hours, begging for mercy and offering to submit to imperial rule. Dr. Ward looked up from her notes. She had been on Earth during those first days of contact, had seen the fear and confusion in the faces of people who suddenly realized they were not alone in the universe and that their new neighbors wanted to destroy them. Instead of surrender messages, we received something we had never encountered before, Zexathara said. Your government sent us recordings of your military leaders, not pleas for mercy or attempts to negotiate. They sent us declarations of war. Admiral Jake Morrison himself appeared on our communication screens and spoke words that confused our entire command structure. Morrison remembered that day clearly. He had been a captain then, chosen to deliver humanity's response because he had a reputation for staying calm under pressure. He had looked directly into the camera and said words that would echo across the galaxy. You have made a mistake coming here. Humans do not surrender. Humans do not bow to alien conquerors. If you want our worlds, you will have to take them from our cold, dead hands. And we promise you this. We will make you pay for every inch of space, every drop of blood, every breath of air. Come and try to take what is ours. We did not understand what those words meant, Zexathera admitted. Every species we had conquered before understood the logic of surrender when faced with superior force. Your Captain Morrison spoke as if humans actually believed they could defeat ships and weapons centuries more advanced than anything they possessed. Our analysts concluded that humans were either insane or too primitive to understand their situation. The alien paused and looked directly at Admiral Morrison. We were wrong on both counts. You were not insane and you were not too primitive. You were something we had never encountered in all our centuries of conquest. You were a species that had learned to fight not just with weapons and ships, but with something we did not possess. You fought with the absolute refusal to accept defeat, even when defeat was the only logical outcome. The courtroom was silent except for the soft humming of the air recycling systems. Everyone present could feel the weight of history in Zexathara's words, the moment when two species that had evolved on different worlds and in different ways first faced each other across the darkness of space. That refusal to surrender would prove to be humanity's greatest weapon, the alien said quietly, and our greatest nightmare. Commander Zexathara's 4 eyes grew distant as he remembered the first real battle of the war. His chains clinked softly as he leaned back in his chair, the sound echoing through the silent courtroom. Admiral Morrison and Dr. Ward watched carefully, knowing that what they were about to hear would change how the galaxy understood warfare forever. New Denver was supposed to be our first easy victory, the alien began, his voice heavy with the weight of memory. It was a mining colony on the edge of your solar system, far from Earth's main defenses. The settlement had maybe 50,000 humans living there, working the asteroid fields and processing rare metals. Our intelligence said they had no military, ships, no orbital platforms, just a few security shuttles and mining equipment. Dr. Ward remembered New Denver well. She had visited the colony twice before the war, studying how humans adapted to life in the harsh environment of space. The colonists had been tough people, the kind who could make a living pulling valuable metals out of rocks floating in the cold vacuum between planets. Captain Sam Rodriguez commanded the colony's security force, Zexithara continued. 12 armed shuttles, and maybe 200 trained fighters. According to our battle computers, he should have surrendered the moment our fleet dropped out of hyperspace above his colony. Any rational commander would have seen that resistance was impossible. The alien paused, and something that might have been respect crossed his features. Captain Rodriguez was not rational by our standards. When we broadcast surrender demands, he responded by evacuating most of the colony's civilians to hidden bunkers in the asteroid field. Then he sent us a message that our translators initially thought was a mistake. Morrison had heard the recording of that message many times. Rodriguez had been calm and professional when he spoke to the Kalani fleet. His words were simple and direct. New Denver will not surrender. We will fight you with everything we have. When we run out of weapons, we will fight you with tools. When we run out of tools, we will fight you with our bare hands. You will take this colony only after you have killed every last one of us. We assumed this was the bluster of a doomed commander trying to sound brave before his inevitable defeat, Zexithara explained. Our ground assault forces prepared for a standard occupation operation. We would land, overwhelm the small security force, capture the colony's leaders, and broadcast their surrender to discourage resistance on other human worlds. The alien's voice grew quieter as he continued. What we found instead was something our military had never encountered in 8 centuries of conquest. Captain Rodriguez had not prepared to defend New Denver in any way we understood. He had prepared to destroy it. Admiral Morrison leaned forward slightly. He had studied the Battle of New Denver in detail, but hearing it from the enemy's perspective revealed just how completely Rodriguez had confused and terrified the Kalani forces. When our troop transports entered the colony's docking bays, they found empty corridors and abandoned buildings, Zexithara said. Our soldiers moved through the settlement expecting to find hiding civilians and desperate defenders. Instead, they found carefully placed explosive devices connected to motion sensors. Not military weapons, but mining charges and industrial equipment turned into traps. The alien's hands trembled slightly as he spoke. Captain Rodriguez had turned his entire colony into a weapon. Every building, every corridor, every piece of equipment had been rigged to explode when our forces tried to use or examine it. Our soldiers began dying the moment they set foot on New Denver's platforms. Dr. Ward made notes as she listened, documenting the first example of what military historians would later call human adaptive warfare. Rodriguez had taken the tools of peaceful mining and turned them into instruments of war in ways the Kalani could never have predicted. But the explosives were not the worst part, Zexithara continued. The worst part was the volunteers. Over 3,000 colonists had refused evacuation and hidden throughout the settlement. They were not soldiers, just ordinary humans with mining laser and cargo handling equipment. They began attacking our forces from every direction at once. The alien paused, and his voice carried a note of something approaching admiration. Your people fought like nothing we had ever seen. They used knowledge of the colony's layout to appear and disappear like ghosts. They turned maintenance tunnels into attack routes and supply closets into sniper positions. Most importantly, they showed no fear of death. Morrison remembered reading the after-action reports from New Denver. The colonist volunteers had been factory workers, mechanics, teachers, and shop owners. None of them had military training, but all of them had the determination to make the Kalani pay for every meter of their home. Our forces were trained for conventional warfare against opponents who wanted to survive, Zexithara explained. We could not understand fighters who would sacrifice their own lives just to kill 1 or 2 of our soldiers. Every engagement became a nightmare where victory cost us more than we could afford to lose. The alien's voice grew harsh with memory. For 6 days, our forces tried to secure the colony while Captain Rodriguez broadcast messages to every human settlement in the system. Not calls for help or pleas for rescue, but instructions on how to turn mining equipment into weapons and how to rig buildings to explode when enemy forces tried to occupy them. Dr. Ward looked up from her notes. She knew what was coming next, the moment that had changed the course of the entire war. and shocked both species with its implications. On the seventh day, Captain Rodriguez sent us one final message. Zexathara said. He appeared on our communication screens wearing a damaged security uniform, standing in what looked like the colony's main power center. Behind him we could see human volunteers working at control panels preparing something we did not yet understand. The alien's voice dropped to almost a whisper. Captain Rodriguez looked directly into our cameras and spoke words that still haunt my dreams. He said, "You wanted New Denver, so you can have it. All of it." Then he smiled. Morrison felt a chill as he remembered the historical footage of that moment. Rodriguez had been calm and determined, showing no fear or regret about what he was about to do. He had made his choice and accepted the consequences. Captain Rodriguez detonated the colony's fusion reactor, Zexathara stated flatly. He destroyed New Denver completely, along with every human still on the station and 30,000 of our finest warriors. Our command ship was vaporized instantly. 7 other vessels were crippled or destroyed by the explosion. In one moment, a single human had inflicted more casualties on the Kalani Empire than any enemy had managed in the previous century. The courtroom was dead silent. Everyone present understood they were hearing about the moment when humanity had announced to the galaxy that this war would be different from any that had come before. But the explosion was not the end of Captain Rodriguez's strategy. The alien continued. Before he died, he had transmitted detailed instructions for his tactics to every human colony and military base in known space. Within days, other settlements began preparing similar defenses. Your military leaders did not condemn his action as wasteful or desperate. They praised him as a hero and ordered his methods to be studied and improved. Admiral Morrison remembered those dark days when humanity realized that conventional warfare against the Kalani was impossible. Rodriguez had shown them a different path, one that required terrible sacrifices but offered the possibility of victory through pure determination and refusal to accept defeat. We began to understand that we were not fighting a war as we knew it, Zexathara concluded. We were fighting against a species that treated death not as something to be avoided, but as another weapon to be used against its enemies. And that realization terrified us more than any advanced technology ever could.